James Doakes was one of the best characters in Dexter. But despite his explosive ending early on, many fans believe he could have been a much bigger part of the show. So why did the creators waste his potential? When you think of Dexter characters who stole the spotlight every time they were in a scene, it's hard not to think of James Doakes. But the thing that really won people over with Doakes was the complex and morally gray side of his character that you only got to see glimpses of. It made him more relatable and sympathetic, despite how he treated the lab rats of the forensics department. If you were like most people, his backstory made you pay more attention to him the further along the series took you.
My buddies thought I was crazy for becoming a cop.
You find yourself becoming invested in where the character would go, and how he might develop. His traumatic past turned him into a broken man with honest human flaws and emotional scars that made him both so different and so similar to the main character of the show. The dynamic tension between Dexter and Doakes set the tone for the series right from the start. The first line that hooked me on his character was in the series pilot when he was bullying Dexter for his blood spatter analysis on some recent murders. He sarcastically asks Dexter,
"You think I'm here to invite you to my nephew's bris?"
And Dexter responds,
I didn't know you were Jewish.
"This is the kind of back and forth that we all needed for 8 full seasons." But
Surprise, motherfucker.
that's not what happened. As the show progresses in the first 2 seasons, you start to see how similar Dexter and Doakes are underneath the surface. Both have dark pasts that influence their place in the world and the morals they believe in. They both feel the need to distance themselves from anyone who gets too close. And they both have a strong need to deliver ultimate justice to those who deserve it. Doakes' suspicion and constant bullying of Dexter was most likely him projecting his own insecurities about being a killer with a complicated past. And he just wasn't good at hiding it around Dexter.
You give me the fucking creeps, you know that, Dexter?
The more you learn about both of them, the more obvious it becomes that deep down, Dex and Doakes are more like 2 sides of the same coin. It makes you wonder if that's why writer Jeff Lindsay named the character Doakes, because it sounds like the opposite of Dex. While Dexter operates in the shadows, Doakes thrives on the clarity of right and wrong. Dexter is grounded, calm, and meticulous. Doakes is intense, aggressive, and blunt. He relies heavily on intuition, often picking up on subtle cues that others miss. His gut feeling about Dexter's unnerving calmness makes him one of the few who instantly saw through his facade. His no-nonsense attitude and unwavering focus on justice set him apart in a world where many characters can be morally ambiguous. As the show moves through season 2, it's way more obvious that Sergeant Doakes wouldn't be able to develop as much as he could because of how the writers painted him in a corner. It's obvious that someone that tenacious would not be able to get away with investigating our favorite vigilante forever, but it felt like his story was cut criminally short. You knew there would eventually be an epic showdown with Dexter because Doakes was basically like the Terminator and just wouldn't stop until his mission was complete. You just didn't know when it would happen. His early suspicions of Dexter would light the fuse that builds into an exploding conclusion at the end of season 2, but we're mostly limited to seeing Doakes through the lens of Dexter's journey, not his own. For as much backstory as his character had, we're really only given glimpses of his past, what drives him, and the inner demons he fought against. Doakes' story would have been better off if it had been more of a slow burn, instead of cashing out after only 2 seasons. It's why Rita's death hit us so hard. It wasn't just because she was Dexter's wife. It was because we appreciated the human and emotional growth she gave Dexter over the course of 4 seasons. The same could be said for Doakes, who gave Dexter's dark passenger a human element that didn't get as much time to breathe. When he thought Dexter was in Narcotics Anonymous for heroin addiction, he displayed genuine empathy for Dexter for the first time. It showed that there's more to Doakes than we thought.
A lot of cops have been where you are. Stay clean and stay out of my way. We won't have a problem.
Doakes' character arc would have been a lot more interesting if he had just gradually realized how Dexter was lying about his heroin addiction throughout the season. Instead, he found out from a brief 5-second conversation with Deborah. This was a complete waste of a storyline. Having 2 very different characters to sympathize with helped highlight the moral gray areas that the show thrived in. Doakes could have had a much bigger storyline in later seasons if they explored this more, even if it was just for 1 more season. While it would have been a challenge to figure out how to delay the inevitable final encounter with Dexter, it definitely could have been done, and it could have saved the lackluster writing we got in seasons 5 through 8. Once showrunner Clyde Phillips left after season 4, the writing became dull and unexciting. It just didn't feel like the same show. If they had simply sidelined Doakes for a few seasons until they were ready to bring him off the bench, it could have been a way more interesting twist than the uninspired one we got with the Doomsday Killer in Season 6. In Season 2, when Doakes traveled to Haiti to have his old army friend analyze Dexter's blood slides, it would have been a lot more interesting if they made you think that he was killed off or had a tragic accident, only to bring him back when you least expected it. They could have waited to reveal that Doakes was actually alive in Season 7 and came back to help LaGuerta finally catch Dexter.
Surprise, motherfucker.
While everyone else believed that Doakes was the Bay Harbor Butcher, LaGuerta knew better, and she was starting to believe that Doakes might have been right about Dexter all along. It would have made sense that LaGuerta would want to cover for Doakes, much in the same way that Deb was covering for Dexter. Doakes could have stayed off the grid in Haiti, using his army colleagues' network of contacts to figure out his next move to clear his name. Instead, we're forced to say goodbye too soon to someone with untapped potential. Imagine all the bonus one-liners we could have gotten from Doakes in Season 3 when Dexter became BFFs with Miguel Prado, the assistant district attorney who had his own dark passenger and who Dexter began to mentor. This could have added a ton of fun to Doakes' story arc, knowing that Dexter befriended a high-profile public figure with just as much pride for justice as Doakes had. This may have been a lot to fit with everything else going on in Season 3, I'll give you that, but it's something that arguably could have worked. Doakes could have taken the private security job that LaGuerta pulled strings for as a way for the show to keep his character on the sidelines. He could have operated mostly in the background, only appearing when it was really significant. Imagine seeing Doakes discreetly stalking Dexter in the shadows, just like Dexter did to his victims. This might have helped give him more of an upper hand, considering he usually stalked Dexter completely out in the open. As blunt and direct as Doakes was, he had a special ops background in the military, so you would think it would be more believable for him to be more discreet and hidden. Doakes trying to figure out why an assistant DA would suddenly take such a friendly interest in Dexter would have been must-see TV.
How Scott his last moments unfolded.
Why is he trying so hard to be my friend?
Dexter reaching nearly untouchable status would have driven Doakes crazy, considering how often he was strong-armed into looking the other way in the past by a former Special Ops colleague who committed horrifying war crimes. It left him with no choice but to stand by and do his duty. That same kind of frustration brewing from Miguel and Dexter's new friendship might have been too much for someone as high-strung as Doakes to handle. If he hadn't already exploded in Season 2, he probably would have by this point. One potential standoff I think many people would have wanted to see would be Doakes versus Ramon Prado, Miguel's temperamental brother who is also a cop. Since Doakes and Ramon are almost exactly alike, it could have been entertaining to see both of them doing what they thought was right to catch the person who killed Miguel and Ramon's brother, Oscar.
Like they say, it's all good.
Yeah. If good means being part of the team that's never gonna catch our brother's murderer. Bingo.
But instead, butt heads in the process because of how equally passionate and stubborn they both are. While Doakes is hot-headed and impulsive, he has a little more self-control than Ramon and is definitely more strategic. This plotline could have culminated into a standoff between two loose cannon cops that further added to the tension with Miguel, as well as served to distract Doakes from being able to expose Dexter as Oscar's killer. Doakes could have been so prideful and stubborn that he purposely throws Ramon off Dexter's trail to ensure that no member of the Prado family would threaten him as the one who gets to catch Dexter. You've seen Dexter do this exact thing to Doakes during murder investigations a dozen times. But Miguel is not the type who would let someone threaten another one of his brothers. With his new dark passenger taking over, Miguel could have decided to go rogue and kill Doakes instead of Ellen Wolf. This could have created an interesting moral dilemma for Dexter about what to do about it, since Doakes didn't technically fit the code, but it also would have gotten Doakes off his back so he could fulfill the first rule of don't get caught. It could have added a lot of depth to an already exciting side plot that would have still allowed the original Season 3 storyline to play out with LaGuerta turning against Miguel. Another area of wasted potential was how Doakes might have navigated his close connection with Maria LaGuerta once Miguel came back into her life. You learned that LaGuerta and Miguel once had a serious long-term relationship and that she still has feelings for him. But the show also strongly implies that Doakes and LaGuerta had their own romantic relationship in the past as well, but never elaborated on it. I don't think anyone is losing sleep over that because any romantic relationship LaGuerta had was torture to witness. But the truth is, they both had an unquestionable bond that gave both characters a much-needed human touch. One of the few times you see a calmer side to James Doakes is when he's with LaGuerta. As she's telling him that he may have an opportunity to get his job back at Miami Metro, he says he couldn't care less. She suggests meeting with a friend of hers to apply for a security job, and he tells her to set it up. This shows that, at the very least, Doakes humors her because he cares for her. Miguel coming back into her life would have threatened this and added a new level of emotional depth that we don't often get to see from Doakes. One of the biggest missed opportunities was the manner of Doakes' death. Killing Doakes off so early in the series not only halted Dexter and Doakes' dynamic, but also strayed from the original books written by Jeff Lindsay. In the show, he dies in an explosion orchestrated by Lila to get into Dexter's good graces. But the book version of Doakes' story takes a darker turn when he falls victim to Martin Henkin, also known as Dr. Danko. Danko is his former military colleague turned serial mutilator who captures Doakes and subjects him to brutal torture, leaving him severely dismembered and wheelchair-bound for the rest of his life. If they had included Danko in the TV series, they could have had Dexter catch him first before he had a chance to mutilate Doakes, and have both of them take out Danko together. The show already touched on this idea in Season 2 when Dexter saved Doakes from being killed by the drug runners at the remote cabin in the Everglades. If they would have expanded on that concept, it would add more complexity to the moral grayness that Doakes and Dexter shared while allowing for a believable story that extends the Doakes story at least one more season. By ending his arc prematurely, the show missed the chance to explore his character more fully and to keep you more engaged with his ongoing quest for the truth. Given this flexibility to change character storylines, you wonder why the show didn't want to capitalize on Doakes' character more extensively, kinda like Breaking Bad did with Jesse Pinkman. In Breaking Bad, the chemistry between Jesse and Walter White was recognized early on. The Jesse character was originally written to be killed off at the end of the first season, but the writers decided to pivot away from this because they could not ignore that their chemistry made great television. This led to a deeper exploration of Jesse's character and his evolving ongoing relationship with Walter White. The show's writers leveraged this dynamic to create one of the most compelling character arcs in television history. The chemistry between James Doakes and Dexter Morgan was a waste of potential that wasn't realized until it was too late. So when Doakes appeared in a Season 7 flashback, it was the writers' way of admitting they made a huge mistake. It was done purely out of fan service to keep people watching, but it didn't tell us anything new about either character. We already knew Dexter and Doakes weren't friends, and weren't exactly enemies either, but it did remind us that actors who can play off each other so well deserve the chance to develop so that their interactions are more meaningful. It's what makes a show worth watching when we actively root for a character to evolve. The actor who played Doakes, Eric King, even had a small off-screen cameo in Dexter New Blood as a way for the show to pay homage to a fan favorite. This just proves that we deserved a way better ending for one of Dexter's most iconic characters. If you enjoyed this video, you'll enjoy my video about why Harry Morgan is worse than you think.